Welcome back to part 3 of Tactics.Tools 101, where we learn about the intricacies of the data and information available to us through Tactics.Tools, how to ask the right questions about the data, and how we can make better decisions in our games as a result. If you haven't already seen the first two parts, both are available down below in the description and up here in a little card. I'll put part 1. I highly recommend at least checking out part 1 to get a general overview of several of the metrics that are used on Tactics.Tools, as well as the most popular use, picking augments. Now, before we get too deep into this, I want to ask you a question. Did you know that statistically, Shroud of Silence is a straight up better item than Tactician's Crown? That's right, in almost all cases, Shroud of Silence outperforms an entire unit being added to your team, and it's not even close. I mean, Shroud has a higher average place, higher top 4%, and an almost identical win rate. This means Shroud is 100% OP and needs a dramatic nerf, right? Nothing should trump the ultimate in TFT. Tactician's Crown gives you a whole unit for free, opening up a lot of late game boards, allowing you to spike super hard earlier. And Shroud is better? I dropped this information into the Aegis Esports TFT Discord server, having given the implications no thought whatsoever, but making a bold claim. I'm researching for my Tactics.Tools 101 scripts, and some of the data for this set is just wild. Shroud is legit a better item to secure a top 4, top 1 than a Fawn. Like, if you have the choice between taking Shroud or Fawn, it's almost always correct to take the Shroud. Now, I've been beating the drum this entire series that data doesn't tell the whole story, and this is an excellent example of this. Almost immediately, several people popped up to add context and scenarios that explain why, no, Shroud is not a better item than the almighty Tactician's Crown. Coach Max says, not really. It's a bit biased because the point of the game where you're making shrouds or picking shrouds and carousels, you already have items on your carries and it's later in the game, where Fawn can be any time in the game with underground cash outs where you might already be low on health or Earth's grab bag, etc. Nora adds, consider Fawn openers too. 4 people in those lobbies are bot 4ing. Fiendfire further explains, there's also never really a situation where you're choosing between Fawn and a Shroud unless you're picking between Spat on Carousel or a Shroud component. Nora then continues, also, I feel like Shrouds are usually used by cap boards or people scrapping for top 4 placement. When playing behind, I don't usually prio Shroud. IMO, for any football fans, it's kind of like teams that run the ball more win more. That stat is skewed because oftentimes teams that are closely winning or want to close the game out will run the ball more. It's far safer than passing and keeps the clock running. So while true, it's usually due to other factors. So why am I bringing this up? Aside from giving me an opportunity to shout out how helpful, smart, insightful, collaborative, cute, and generally pretty good the Aegis community is, I want to preface our discussion on items and statistics with a real-world example of how we have to think creatively about the data that we're being provided. Statistically, Shroud has much better numbers than Tactician's Crown, but that doesn't mean we should avoid taking the latter item over the former. Shroud is usually a late game item, used to gain a slight edge against powerful late game boards with mana-hungry units like Mordekaiser, Misfortune, Janna. Chances are good that if you have Shroud on your board, you got it from Carousel or an Anvil, or you made it with your leftover items, and you were already in a good spot to top 4. Ultimately, Shroud had little to do with you getting into that spot in the first place. So is Shroud better than Tactician's Crown? Almost certainly not. While you're unlikely to find yourself in a spot where you have to choose between one or the other, it's still a very good example of how data in and of itself can be misleading and why we have to think critically about it. Part 2 of this series looked at the Units tab of Tactics.Tools, and while this information is super useful to us in some ways, the Items tab is, I think, by far the biggest liability when it comes to potential pitfalls and misunderstandings of the data that we're going to be reviewing. In my You're Using Guides Wrong video, link here and down there, I make the claim that best in slot is fake. And we need to move away from forcing specific items on units and tunneling on what is absolutely the best, and instead choose to focus on what is best for us in context. The point is going to be made even clearer by the data in the items tab, which will at times appear to be contradictory and confusing. How are there 2 or even 3 item combinations per unit that could be best in slot? Before we get to answering that question, we have to first break free of the idea that best in slot is a real thing. There is no objective best in slot for each unit, each game, every time. There's only correct and incorrect decisions in the immediate. When we accept this, we can apply the information in the items tab more flexibly, correctly, smartly. Let's get to it. If you watched part 2, first off, thank you. I know that nearly half an hour gut punch of a video is a lot to ask of anyone. Even when I was writing it, I realized it was going to be 1,000 years long. Second off, you'll be relieved to know that the items tab is a lot more straightforward at first. Make no mistake, there is an absolute tsunami of data rippling under the still waters of this seemingly simple page. But for most purposes, we don't really need to get that deep. We're still going to, for reasons, but on the fly, in the moment, navigating this page will be simple and straightforward. We have a list of items. We have a search bar. We have sorting options, normal, orn, emblem, and radiant items. These filters help us quickly see types of items and compare them. Say we just popped an anvil and we want to see the placement averages of the 4 items we've been offered. We can search for these items and quickly see what the data tells us. As for the data itself, we have what should be now familiar basics: play rate, average place, top 4, win percent. As before, lower is better when it comes to average placement. The closer to 1, the closer to top 1 average placement. We have a quick at-a-glance top users and an expand button, and that is where things start to get a little spicy. As I showed in the earlier example, item data is slippery as hell. Even in Masters Plus, people misitemize or slam a really good item a little too late to save the top 4, or get an item from underground payouts, or slam 2 components from ergot treasure boxes, regardless of whether they're good or not. Might as well, right? We handle items very differently than we handle units, and are able to make or acquire just about every item at just about any point in the game. So while the data is going to tell you boards with Shroud of Silence have a 25% win rate, the circumstances surrounding hundreds of thousands of games that define that statistics are impossible to convey through that statistic. I may be beating a dead horse, but final warning, nothing at all in this tab is going to replace knowledge of game states or insight based on context. If you don't fundamentally understand your units, their abilities, and the strengths and weaknesses of other boards in the lobby, this page will not save you. And in fact, it might actively harm you. Let's press the expand button on Shroud and take a closer look at the stats. We can see that in 280 some odd thousand games, the average place is well above 4, with astronomical top 4 and win percentages. In fact, if you have Shroud on your final board, you're almost 50% likely to go top 2. We can also see that the top users are Alistair, Echo, Annie, Fiora, Fiddlesticks, and Viego. This item slots well onto frontline tanks that can be flexibly positioned to target mana-intensive enemy carries. Why are the numbers so skewed on this item? As mentioned before, an item like Shroud is usually a late game pickup reserved for the final fights of the game, where every advantage matters as powerful boards face off against one another. If your big guns cast their massive, impactful abilities before your enemies, you're probably going to kill more units faster, making it more likely that you win fights. Any Masters player can tell you that slamming Shroud of Silence on 2-1 is a massive, potentially game-ending grief. Sure, you might want Shroud on 6-1, but at 2-1, what value are you really getting out of it? Would you rather have 5 stages of value from Shroud of Silence or Sunfire Cape? If I have Chain, Glove, Belt at 2-1, I'm slamming Sunfire 100% of the time, and it's not even close. So why bother with this items list tab, whatever, in the first place? Great question. A lot of the time, you really shouldn't, unless you're very confused or lost about what to do, or trying to decide between two or more good options. Most of our itemization should be straightforward. If you have Tyr and Bow and Kaisa at 2-1, you're probably slamming Shiv on the Kaisa and turning your brain off for half an hour. If you have Blitz 2 and Chain Belt, you're almost certainly making Sunfire as quickly as you possibly can. I find this tab most useful outside of standard item use cases, particularly with Ornn and emblem items. Who is the best anima emblem holder? What Ornn or Radiant items are particularly strong for my board? We see these items less frequently and are often using an augment slot to acquire them, so we damn well better be sure that we're picking the best option that we have. Even still, there are potential pitfalls. I obviously don't want to make Radiant Sunfire when I already have Sunfire aboard, but there are less obvious examples of imperfect play. Do I want to take a Radiant tank item when I have defensive items on bench? Do I want to take Gold Collector at 4-2 because I had to roll a lot on 4-1 and think I can make back my deficit? Do I wait until I find Echo to put my Anima Squad emblem on him? Or is there someone else that can hold that item in the meantime, and who is going to be the best for that? The data in Tactics.Tools can't necessarily answer any of these questions for you. You're going to have to rely on your knowledge and intuition to decide. This is part of why people in Twitch chats are so insistent about asking for best in slot. Why so many questions posed to streamers are, why did you make X item on Y unit? Items are complex and interactions not always obvious, and their impact on the game is massive. Getting it right matters, and the data is limited in its ability to help us with these decisions. Limited, but not completely useless, obviously. If we look at the Radiant items, we can see Rascal's Gloves have the highest play rate of all the items, as well as a very good placement average. Radiant TG is clearly a very strong pick if offered, and can fit into almost any board or situation. Looking at the emblems tab, we can see that Oxforce emblem has a high pick rate and a great placement average. Being able to slam Oxforce onto a powerful frontline tank like Echo is extremely powerful in a lot of comps that are popular in the meta. Being able to make this emblem and put it on an important unit is a good thing. We can see that certain Ornn items are simply better than others, but they're kind of universally good. The lowest placement average still sits comfortably below the 4.5 average. These basic insights can help us with augment choices, team builds, and future planning for our games, all very important parts of being successful at TFT. We can see general trends from the normal items sorting. IE and Jeweled Gauntlet, as of this writing anyway, have the lowest average place of any normal items. Crits are simply not all that impactful in the current meta compared to raw damage items like Deathcap, and certainly not as important as frontline items. Protector's Vow, Locket, they all have better averages, at least of this writing. Since Samira, Jhin, and several other units got their crit bugs patched, that may be different. You'll have to find out for yourself. All of this information can inform us when we find ourselves with a chain tier belt opener. Slamming Vow and saving belt for Sunfire statistically will have more value overall than slamming Redemption. The delta on Vow plus Sunfire is negative 0.4, and Redemption plus Sunfire is negative 0.23. A small difference, but a difference nonetheless. I said earlier we were going to delve into this information for reasons, and here is really the reason. Being able to research things like this outside of the game allows us to make better decisions faster inside the game. This small itemization decision, whether to make Redemption or Protector's Vow, is something we now know until it changes in the next patch or whatever. And we can implement that immediately because we spent time outside of the game researching the game. Me looking it up, you watching a video that provides it. Both of us are doing out-of-game research. We can use the Items tab in conjunction with the Units tab as well. Let's say it's 2-1 and we want to slam an item. We're not sure what direction we want to go, but we have Rod Glove and a Lux 2. What is going to give us the best value now and the most flexibility later? Assuming we want to play Nico, Twisted Fate, or even Misfortune as our main AP carry, we can compare the two items and their stats on these units. Looking at Jeweled Gauntlet, we see that it's not a very good item. In fact, as of this writing, it has a positive delta on 2 of the 3 units I just listed, and all of them a difference of like plus or minus 0.01 or 0.02. Basically, there's no functional difference statistically between having or not having this item on any of our future carries. Looking at Rabadons, we see a much different story. We have a significant negative delta on each of our carry units when they have Death Cap, especially on Nico or Misfortune. We can safely slam Death Cap, play around the glove, and angle to play Misfortune, Nico, Twisted Fate, or even Aurelian Soul as our carry, depending on where the game leads us. We have an upgraded Star Guardian in Lux, might be good to start playing toward that line. However, now we're playing around the glove, which isn't the best, but it's not the worst. We can see that Guardbreaker and Hand of Justice are good items to make. TG is generally okay to build. We've made a flexible AP item, and we've left ourselves a flexible component to play around. This is an ideal state for an early game slam, a powerful item we can slam that is going to give us value and direction the entire game, plus a flexible item component that we can play around and build around in the future. This is the kind of information the Item tab can give us, and the kind of decision making we can learn and practice outside of the game to make us better inside of the game. Now, these are some of the most simple decisions we can make. We have 3 components on 2-1 and want to figure out the best way to play them. As we get more units, items, and augments throughout the game, these decisions become more complex, but ultimately the decisions we make early are going to inform and reduce the complexity of decisions we make later. If I pick up a tier on Carousel at 2-4 and slam Hodge, I now have 2 out of 3 items made for my eventual main carry. This simplifies our decision making and allows us to possibly focus on tank items, and can allow us to look at the data for our third item. If I look at Misfortune in the Units tab, I can quickly and obviously see that Spear of Sojin is a high priority, giving me specific direction to follow for my third item. If I went with the Nico line, I see the same information. I have damage, now I need mana. But wait, rain. If I get tier at Carousel on 2-4, isn't it early enough to greed that tier for that Spear of Sojin? If that item is going to be so important for my carry, isn't it worth not slamming that item immediately, since it's a key component I might need later? If I get another tier from Krugs, then I can slam Hodge no problem, but until then, I should probably wait? You're so fucking smart, you beautiful, sexy beast of a TFT player. These are the kinds of insights that data isn't going to give you, but that are essential for TFT players to learn. Greeting versus slamming is a fundamental skill in TFT. Go check out my You're Using Guides Wrong videos to learn more. And you've just hit the crux of it. Tactics.Tools can give you information, but it's on you to synthesize that information for your game, your spot, your moment. Now, there's way more to explore when it comes to itemization, but hopefully I've given you an overview of this tab and some of the ways you can best utilize it to become a better and more informed TFT player. If there's something I missed, which I'm sure I did, or some ways I've used the information wrong, or some way that you've used Tactics.Tools to make your game better, let me know in the comments. As always, if you've learned anything at all from this video, or you want to see more content in the future, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and consider subscribing to my Patreon at patreon.com/rain101. It is not a lot of money. It supports me directly. It's way better than pretty much anything you can do, and it gets your name added to the end of my videos, which is always super cool. Anyway, the next step in our series is going to cover the rest of the miscellany of Tactics.Tools. Each of the rest of our stats and tools is smaller and covers a smaller use case. So we're going to cram all the rest of it into one video for a last-ditch study session. Good luck. Godspeed, and great success in your climb. I hope you guys go out there and kill it. I'll see you in the lobbies. Please don't steal my LP. I need it. I really need it. I just really don't take my LP, please. Thank you.